Afternoon, everyone. This is a reminder that the meeting will be recorded and will appear on the Nestrans website soon after. Members of the board should leave their cameras on, but switch off their microphones until they wish to speak. Officers should switch their microphones and cameras off until the chair brings you in to the meeting. Those observing today's proceedings should have their microphones and cameras switched off at all times. If members wish to speak, please press the raise your hand icon, which is located on the Teams toolbar, but remember to switch it off after the chair brings you in. Alternatively, members can use the chat section to alert the chair. I will now start the recording and undertake a roll call to identify those in attendance. Councillor Sandra MacDonald.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Councillor Peter Argyle.
I'm here.
Vice Chair Dr. Maggie Buckle.
Here.
Councillor David Aitchison.
Present.
Councillor Philip Bell.
Present.
Councillor George Carr.
Here.
Councillor John Cox.
Here.
Councillor Michael Hutchison.
Here.
Councillor Avril McKenzie.
Here.
Colin Allenach.
Here.
Jerry Donald.
Present.
And Ian Ross.
Present.
Thank you. I'll now hand over to the chair.
Thank you very much for that. Can I start by informing the board that George Mayer has handed in his resignation. George has been an advisor on our board, as you know, for First Bus, and I had the privilege of serving with him on the very first Nestrans board when we kicked off a few good years ago. George has been a fantastic ambassador for buses in our region, no doubt about it. Certainly on that first Nestrans board when we went down to York to look at what was then new buses in the making and bus priority measures and so on. He was a great advocate for buses, old, new, and going everywhere. So if the board agrees, I think we should write to George and thank him for his sterling efforts over many years and wish him all the very best in a happy and healthy retirement, if that's okay. Any other comments people would like to make, or should we leave it there? I'm not seeing anybody wanting to say more other than agree. Councillor Argyle.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I absolutely agree with that. George has been, as you say, a tremendous ambassador for the region, and his expertise and knowledge has been of immense value to Nestrans. So yes, I think the warmest letter that you can possibly write, then right away.
Thank you very much. Okay, if that's agreed, can we go on to members' declarations of interest? If anybody's got anything on the agenda today they feel they want to declare an interest on? Nope. Then if we go to the minute from our last meeting, which of course was held virtually in September. Anything anybody wants to make comment on that? If not, can we agree that that is a correct minute of our board? Thank you. So on to our first report, which is on budget matters. And if we could have Mr. Smith to perhaps say a little about the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This report details Nestrans' financial position as at 30th of September 2020. As per Q1 position, spend is low in comparison to budget, but work is ongoing on projects, albeit with continued restrictions of COVID. To this effect, a number of environments have been proposed to utilise this year's budget, and those are detailed in Appendix 2 of the report. In addition, I'd like to add that a report will be presented to next month's board, setting out the recommended proposals for the holding of a capital reserve by Nestrans and the implications of this following the adoption of the Transport Scotland Act 2019. To that effect, views of Nestrans, Aberdeen City, Aberdeenshire and External Audit are being considered in the preparation of this report. With that, Chair, I'll state there are 2 recommendations to the board per page 12 of the papers. Thank you.
Members of the board, are there any questions you'd like to ask on this paper? Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so it's just related to an item in Appendix 2 of the report. Installation of new automatic number plate reading journey time monitoring sites. I just wondered what that would actually do. Perhaps I should know this, but so the item says that the vehicle types and emissions associated with each vehicle will be monitored. I'm wondering how that will be done. Will it just be a database plug-in? You know, how will that actually work? Curiosity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. Who would like to answer that if possible?
I'll try if I may, Chair. It is one that the City Council have brought forward as a proposal. It supports their proposals for the low emission zone, but it would give us more data in terms of where traffic is moving to, from and around the city. About being able to help build up a better information base to support other projects going forward. My understanding is that the information is fed into a database, as Councillor Bell says, which is able to then, from the number, give an indication of what type of vehicle and particularly what age of vehicle, which then translates into the type of engine, particularly thinking in terms of vans, goods vehicles, buses, etc., when the age of the vehicle then translates into a Euro 3, Euro 4, Euro 5 engine, etc. So it helps us to build a better knowledge base to support some of the proposals going forward.
Councillor Bell?
Well, I'm just wondering, actually, I thank you. I thought that's what that would mean, but it sounds a bit sort of Big Brotherish. So now I don't mind if people know what I've gone to the chippy or whatever, but I wonder if other folk would, because this is actually monitoring your journeys and it's monitoring you, then it means that you are on a database. Is that the intention?
My understanding is that that's done in an anonymised way, in that your details, Councillor Bell, wouldn't go into the database, but it's just that your vehicle is photographed, the number plate is then categorised, and that vehicle's category is then looked at. But certainly my understanding is there's no information about individuals, about car owners, for example, that would in any way come back either to the council or to others that were operating the system.
Thank you for that.
Any other questions on the budget? If not, can we agree the recommendations to note the monitoring position and approve the environments on Appendix 2? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. Okie doke, if we move on now to report 4.1, which is the usual director's report. So Mr. Dixon, if you could take us through that, that'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Chair. As you say, item 4.1 is the director's report, which gives an indication of the number of meetings we've been involved in over the period since the last board meeting. I'm pleased to say that we're now returning to some form of normality after the coronavirus pandemic, whereby the number of meetings that we're getting involved in and the way we're able to influence national policy and others is starting to return to what feels a little bit like normal, although all of the meetings in the period have been held virtually since the last meeting. I wanted to bring particular attention to the two appendices. One is the meeting of the Bus Alliance Board on the 10th of September. And obviously the fact that George Mayer has resigned from the board, I should also inform the board that he has also intimated his resignation as chair of the Bus Alliance Board. So we will be looking through the Bus Alliance members at a potential successor to George. And I think, as was indicated when we were talking about his contribution to Nestrans, his contribution to the Bus Alliance Board will be a particularly difficult role to fill. The other one I wanted to mention, Appendix 2, was the steering group of the Health and Transport Action Plan, which met on the 29th of September and is chaired by Jerry Donald. Good progress, I think, on the Health and Transport Action Plan, and the minute is there to see the progress going forward. I perhaps also wanted to mention the fact that there had been a volunteer transport awards ceremony, which I think was very well received. A number of volunteers were recognised, and there was good feedback on that event, and also good feedback, I think, in terms of a bit of media coverage and recognition of the work that volunteers do, particularly in helping to access to health. It's been a particularly challenging time, as people will understand over the last few months. There are two that aren't mentioned on the report because they've been more recent than the report was pulled together. National Transport Strategy have established a delivery group, which Councillor MacDonald, as chair of Nestrans, has been selected to represent the 7 regional transport partners' interests across Scotland. And I don't know if Sandra wants to say more about that. But also there is a transport governance reference group, which both myself and Ewan Wallace of Aberdeenshire have been sitting on, and that met yesterday for the first time in 10 months, I think. So just to say, as I say, we're getting back to some semblance of normality, but mostly through virtual meetings like this one. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks very much, Mr. Dixon. Yes, we've had our first virtual meeting of the National Transport Strategy Delivery Board. I have to say, Ewan Wallace is also a member of that board from the North East, so we do have good representation on that board, and you know, we will be working to make sure that voices are heard on that board going forward. I went along virtually to the volunteers event, and I have to say it did sparkle. It was great. There was interlude of music and all the rest, and just to hear the stories of what people had done, you know, over the peace for their communities was really uplifting. So if you ever get the chance to go along to that particular award, it really is a very grassroots one, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I see you've got your hand up on there.
Thank you, Chair. So 2 questions really. One of them was Civitas Portis. I see that there was a virtual meeting. It was supposed to have been hosted in Aberdeen, but I wondered if you could perhaps just say a little bit about what what was decided. And there were quite a few delegates who actually who appeared virtually. I'm sure there were some interesting outcomes from that.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Councillor Bell. As you know, Aberdeen and the partners in the Aberdeen City region were partners, one of 5 port cities who had been involved in the Civitas Portis project. The final meeting of the international grouping was supposed to be held in Aberdeen in I think August of this year. It was deferred a little bit and was then eventually held virtually. As you say, there was, I think, pushing 100 delegates involved, very ably chaired by Gail Beattie. and a presentation from and a welcome from the Lord Provost as well at that meeting. So a real shame and disappointment that the partners weren't able to come and visit Aberdeen and see the progress that there has been during the period of the project. But a short video was made, and I think it was a successful event, albeit not the type of event we had probably planned for. To add anything to that?
No, I was terrified you were going to mention the video. So there is a video which is on the Civitas site, which at least gave people a flavour of Aberdeen. I think it's been really useful throughout the life of the project that actually the other cities have, for the most part, all been to Aberdeen as part of exchange visits. So it was even worse because they knew what they were missing. So they didn't get to back down to the beach ballroom for the wonderful catering that they had enjoyed. But I think it's been really interesting just to try and get the project finished in such challenging times. And I think the European Commission have obviously acknowledged that timescales have had to be extended slightly. But I was very pleased that at the meeting, Aberdeen had managed to complete all their actions, and we are in a position now where we're just about finished. We've got one small thing to do on wayfinding, but we will make the deadline.
Thanks very much, Ms. Beattie. Councillor Bell, do you have another question?
Yeah, so and this was with regard to the Bus Rapid Development Fund. Now, clearly, at the moment with space for people, so forth, buses aren't travelling rapidly anywhere. But I noticed in the report, though, it talks about bus stop improvements. Now, I've not been using the bus since, I haven't used the bus since March. I tend to either walk or use my car via very circuitous route to get to places. But I wonder if you could perhaps just give us a little bit more information on what's happened to the bus stop improvements and where the buses are now. Perhaps I should know this, but I'm sorry, Ed.
Thank you.
It's okay. I can start, and then Rab can come in. So obviously this was a fund that the Scottish Government through Transport Scotland had made available, and it was in essence a spaces for buses instead of a spaces for people. So on looking at temporary measures, but interventions to deal with congestion, we had the idea, because the nature of the bus stops in Aberdeen are not conducive to physical distancing, and the weather, we're obviously heading into the winter months. So one of the proposals that we'd put forward, or we had scoped out, was to look at long length bus stops, similarly to what you would find at tram stops in a lot of the European countries, which would at least give people a fighting chance to be sheltered and physically distanced. But unfortunately, when Nestrans had the discussions with Transport Scotland, that wasn't something they felt they could support through that fund, because they were looking for more significant interventions.
Thanks, Ms. Beattie. Mr. Dixon, do you want to add to that?
If I could just add a little bit onto that, the intention was to give consideration to whether a bid under the Bus Priority Early Development Fund was possible. But as Gail said, the suggestion from Transport Scotland was that the elements that we were putting forward were unlikely to be successful under that scheme. We have taken some of these ideas and have included them in the Nestrans budget. The environments which were just approved 10 minutes ago do include, I think, a total of 218,000 for bus improvements, which had come about through that discussion through the Bus Alliance, but hadn't been able to be met through that fund. So I think the fact that we can go back to the Bus Alliance and say we've been able to deliver and develop some of these schemes will go down well. The specific question, though, Councillor Bell, about bus stops, we haven't at this stage been able to develop a programme of improving bus stops and bus shelters due to the lack of staff available and resource available within the City Council to deliver that. It's certainly something that I would like to still bring forward, but we need to get the ducks in a row in terms of being able to fund that, to get it delivered on the ground. So it's still a piece of work to follow, I would suggest.
Thank you very much.
I'm not seeing any other. Oh, Mr. Ross, you've got a question, Ian.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'm just interested in the comment that Transport Scotland were looking for more significant interventions. Was there any hint as to what significant means? Because that's probably something quite difficult to achieve at the moment.
Mr. Dixon?
Yeah, I mean, what they were looking for really was road space reallocation in blunt terms. Because of the way that Spaces for People had come about in the city centre, there had already been some road space reallocation and some bus measures had been put in through the earlier fund, and therefore we were building on something. So they'd come in separate stages, separate phases. They weren't happy to look at either what they saw as permanent infrastructure nor what they saw as being tinkering around the edges. So the potential for funding some of the smaller scale stuff wasn't there, but it was a temporary fund. So it was always one that fell into a very niche area of being significant, but being temporary. And we just felt that probably there were other ways of delivering those types of schemes rather than the temporary fund that was being suggested.
Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. So if we could agree to note the progress on page 19 of the report.
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you. If we go on to agenda item 4.2. So this is Mr. Finch is going to take us through the COVID update report.
Thank you very much, Chair. I've presented this similar report for the last couple of boards now, so the format should be familiar for those who have been able to participate. Basically, we've just given a quick overview of the Nestrans strategic response to the ongoing COVID situation. Fair enough to say that on this most recent report, we have to reflect that the COVID situation nationally has actually declined. I guess when we kicked off in March and April, we were hopeful of a steady improvement across the COVID situation, but obviously that has not prevailed. However, in terms of the operational response, the Nestrans office is still closed. However, as Rab intimated earlier, we are successfully managing to get back to fairly normal operations, albeit virtually. In terms of prevailing travel patterns, the data and the observations are that at least on the road traffic levels and the freight levels, not quite back up to pre-COVID levels, although across the day they do appear to be about 90–95% of pre-COVID levels. What's important to note is the distribution of that traffic. It still does not appear to have a very strong AM and PM focus. It seems to be much more dispersed across the day, and the AM PM peaks are not as difficult as previously they were in terms of peak traffic. It's worth noting that there have been increases across the period in terms of active travel, walking and cycling, particularly on leisure routes, although the colder weather, the wind and the rain has suppressed more recently some of that activity. We continue to produce or publish work on the attitudes and behaviours of people in the North East Scotland, as we discussed at the last meeting. The fourth period of reporting has now been published on the Nestrans website, and the executive summary arising from that is presented as Appendix 1. These results relate to the last week of September. There's always a bit of a lag before we can, between the reporting and there. We can put them, distribute them. I think the key thing of the indicators on a 4-week by 4-week basis have been relatively consistent. There still seems to be a relatively positive sentiment around walking and cycling, particularly around for leisure uses. There still seems to be concern around going back onto buses, public transport and taxis, and certainly private car use is also viewed positively in that sense of being secure from other people. I think another element is that there's a growing acceptance of the shift that has happened with virtual working, and that on a month-by-month basis, there seems to be a growing acceptance that face-to-face business meetings will decline in the longer term as well. In terms of the restart of national travel planning work, the Strategic Transport Planning Review has restarted. We had a meeting towards the end of October, and the results of that are going to be published in 2 tranches. So the first tranche we're expecting sometime in December, and that apparently will be the quick wins, the obvious interventions that support the COVID recovery and the transition that have been identified at a national level. The more difficult, or the ones that are more significant, requiring more appraisal work, will not be reported as was previously the plan March time in 2021. Will be over a longer period, perhaps another 12 months before some of those are published. In the report, I refer to the Bus Priority Fund, which is the successor to the Rapid. It's the more substantive fund opportunity, so that will be coming along as well. And that provides an opportunity to perhaps some of the more substantive longer-term interventions that we've previously discussed. We continue to do promotion across the Get About website. Yeah, and I think that gives us an overview of some of the areas of work that we're working on at the moment. So ask if there's any questions, happy to take them.
Councillor Carr, you've got your hand up first.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was just to build on the comments I made at the last meeting too, particularly on spaces for people, still is rumbling on. So I think we still have further work to do on that front. Paul, my main concern is obviously around process, where we consult people, we go out, we involve people in decisions that we take. And I think with the spaces for people, we seem to be getting ourselves in a bit of difficulty here. There's a lot of negativity around that. We've got petitions, certainly one for what's been done down the beach in particular, and in the Shire, we've got hot spots there where businesses are totally opposed to what we're doing. So it's just really, and I suppose the other aspect is just the hijacking of the agenda, because it was allegedly, for social distances and COVID, but now, as we've spoken about, it's reallocating road space, and all sorts of things are creeping in, which public are a bit uneasy about, because they feel we're using COVID as an to bring in other things, which we've got to be careful about, because what we do, we always do by consent, and we must take the people with us. And I think the last meeting we said we had further communication to do on this, so I think we've got to be careful that we don't create reputational damage to our own processes and so on in the longer term through what we're doing here. So it's just a note of caution about how we take this forward. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Carr. Now, I next have somebody here called Snacks, and so I'm not very sure who it is, to be perfectly honest. So perhaps you could.
It's Colin.
Is it you?
It's me.
All right.
Yeah.
Colin, would you like to come in?
Yeah. First of all, about that, I have a problem with my with anything that goes through this. It comes up at work all the time. It crosses anytime I go into these meetings. It comes up with my old nickname that's on that. So I apologise. I guess Councillor Carr will go into some of the issues that you mentioned later on with something that I'm bringing up. But I like the infogram that's up there at the end about the positivity and everything. Do I remember rightly? Was there a graph that showed month by month how the active travel and the different travel modes was going on? I don't remember if I saw that again.
Thanks. Mr. Finch?
Yes, the City Council very kindly provide that, and ironically on this particular report I declined. I thought I would simplify the information that I was putting out, and so declined to include those graphs. However, the previous board report did have those graphs on active travel across a number of different locations on key routes, some of them commuter, some of them leisure routes, of which certainly up until sort of September time we're showing on those leisure routes high levels of activity.
Yeah, I personally found them quite useful to see where we were going with everything and what the trends were. That's it.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mr. Allenach, and it's certainly something that we at the city level have asked for as well, because I think having a snapshot at a particular time is useful, and that's good, but you also want to be able to see trends. So I've got Councillor. Well, I've got Ms. Beattie. Do you want to come in on this point, Ms. Beattie?
Yeah, no, it was just to say that we obviously are doing a weekly report round about that information. So it's not overly user friendly, but I can certainly have a conversation with the team and include the councillors on Nestrans within that circulation. I mean, it's not secret information. So if the board would find that helpful, I'm happy to try and facilitate that.
Thanks, Ms. Beattie. I've got Councillor Gile next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I did want to just very quickly respond to the comments of Councillor Carr. I hope you'll allow me to do that. It may be of interest to the rest of the board as well. In Aberdeenshire, there have been recently a round of meetings with ward members in the towns where Spaces for People has been put in place. The feedback from that is just about ready and will be coming out to members fairly soon. We're just waiting for comments from health on that, because clearly the purpose of Spaces for People is predominantly and overwhelmingly to keep people safe and keep people healthy. So that's on its way. Any decisions will then arise from that. None have been taken yet, and there is certainly no decision future change to the balance between pedestrians and motorists. That's still a discussion to be had. So there's no secret agenda or anything like that lurking around, just in case anyone got the impression from Councillor Carr's remarks that is the case. That's just simply where we are in Aberdeenshire, except it's a niche area as far as Nestrans is concerned, but I just did want to get that situation clarified. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gile, and helpfully Ms. Wiltshire has put up a link to the Aberdeen City Council website, so that's good. I've got Councillor Bell next.
Thank you, Chair. So again, as with the last Nestrans meeting, Appendix 1, please can I ask for just a couple of questions with regard to that. So this is telling us about travel attitudes and so forth, what we like, what we dislike. But I'm actually puzzling what it is really telling me. So if I just look across the piece, so 62% think travelling by car is quite good. 79%, however, think that walking is just fantastic. 42% think that cycling is all right. Taxi 15%, past 20%, and so on. And I look at the balloon data immediately below those graphs, and I'm looking now at the one in the middle. Travelling by car is easier, more convenient, 42%. But then when I look at the bar graph, it shows me that 62% think that travelling by car is wonderful. So when that, to me, just kind of outlines really what is this actually telling me, apart from the obvious that people like walking, like using the car. Many people don't use the taxi because it's expensive. some like cycling. So I'm just trying to get a feel for what you're truly telling me.
Mr. Finch, do you want to come in on that?
Okay, thank you very much for the questions, Councillor Bell. I guess one thing that we were keen to do is to see how over the weeks those attitudes changed. If we were anticipating a journey from a severe lockdown in April to a less severe lockdown around about now, when we commissioned the work, and this is not just Nestrans who have commissioned this sort of work, Transport Scotland have commissioned similar work with similar questions, and across the UK basis, Transport Focus as well have commissioned similar work on this month by month basis. The interest was, how are people changing their attitudes, and are people changing their travel behaviours at this time of what at that point was unprecedented disruption to how their lives were undertaken, and how would that then change as we eased out? Would there be a long-lasting legacy, or would there be a temporary change? And we have, so that is the value in what we see that we're taking from that, because at the time when we were in March and April, we were really heading into unknown territory in terms of how people were reacting to this and how they would come out of that. So that's the value that we have seen in that, and we have continued to distribute not just this one-page summary, but the detailed answers to the questions to our stakeholders and people in the public transport and other transport planners, and they have found it useful to understand how things have been changing in the North East in respect to these the situation that we've been going through in these last six months. So to me, that is the value in it. The snapshots are useful, but it is also the ability to repeat the same questions over that period of time to get that longitudinal test to see if people's attitudes are changing as well.
Okay, thank you. So how have people's attitudes changed? Because I can't see that data, how they have changed. So for instance, car, 62%, is that up 5%? Is it down 3%? I don't know.
Okay, so what we've found over the 4 and even the 5 surveys that we have undertaken is those attitudes have towards different forms of transport have remained constant, relatively constant within a few degrees. There has not been much of a shift into people's attitudes around there. The big hit of COVID has been to public transport and taxi, not because I think people are worried about the interaction and catching the virus. These are the key things, and they're concerned about the potential cleanliness and interaction with other people. I think that's what's happened, is there's been a big hit, and we've seen that then translate into actual figures on these modes as well. So that's what has been revealed, but there hasn't been, as we might have anticipated, a shift over time on there. Where there has been a shift, I've sought to highlight that in the text. Those shifts have been around people anticipating the longer term that there will be more business meetings undertaken virtually, and we also are anticipating a 10 to 15% long-term reduction in commuting in terms of the attitudes that we say. Some other aspects in the North East compared to Scottish data, for example, we know that more people are actually travelling to work than they are in the Central Belt. There seems to be more people do jobs in the North East which require actual travel to a physical place of work than they are able to replicate that as well. So again, that might have some implications if we have to do another lockdown or some of those issues as well.
Okay, thank you. That's interesting.
It is interesting, and I think, I think there is a link there as well, Councillor Bell, that you can go and delve into those a little bit more and get that information. And I think it would be useful as we go forward to maybe get some of that trend data, because it is useful to shape our thinking. So so thanks for that. I've got Ms. Beattie, would you want to come in on that?
Sorry, that was a legacy hand.
Not a problem. So members, we've got 3 recommendations on page 31 of the report to note the changes in the operation of the Nestrans executive duty restrictions, to note the key changes to the operation and use of transport report, and to note of work of what Nestrans continues to do to adapt during this period. So can we agree those recommendations?
Agreed.
Yep.
Thank you. So on to the draft regional transport strategy, and you know, I'd like to again record our thanks to Nestrans team. This has been, as we know and we've said before, a huge bit of work. It's going to shape where we go in the future. We have the report in front of us now from consultation, but there's still work to be done, and there's still a way to go. So perhaps I could get Mrs. Chalmers to kick off and introduce the report for us. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. As board members will already be aware, that we've just closed our 10-week consultation on the draft RTS and its supporting documents. So the purpose of this report really is to provide a bit of a summary of the key themes and issues that have arising from the comments that we received. We received in total 94 responses from a range of members of the public, as well as community groups, community councils, and key stakeholders, which is significantly more than the 27 that we received back in 2013 on the RTS refresh. And the Appendix A of the report provides details of those organisations, community groups that have responded, and that is in addition to the members of the public that have responded. As part of the consultation, we consulted with a whole range of people. We did a number of workshops, and that's detailed in the table above. We had really significant traffic through the Nestrans 2040 consultation website and the virtual exhibition, which was really positively received. We received a lot of really good comments on that. And you can see the figures are presented there. There will be some double counting, and also some that are not recorded in the hits to the website just through the use of the analytic function. Some people blocking that, but it's an indication. The responses to the consultation that we received were in 2 forms, either via a pro forma questionnaire from the website, or just via email, in whatever form the respondent wanted to put that in. So what we've done is we've gone through all of these, and Appendix B provides a summary of the key themes and issues that have been coming through in those responses, and we've grouped them under the headings of the questionnaire, which in turn reflect the main sections of the strategy. So you can see for each section of the strategy the range of comments that are being raised. The majority of the comments relate to the draft strategy itself. There are some that relate to the strategic transport appraisal and the strategic environmental assessment, as well as the other supporting assessments. But a review of those sort of shows that they are also reflected in the comments on the draft strategy itself. So we haven't presented those separately at this stage. So on a review of all of the responses received, we've pulled out 7 key themes that we just wanted to highlight at this point. The responses are really varied, and some of them are really quite short and concise. Some of them extend to quite a number of pages and are very detailed. A lot of the changes will be able to be dealt with through pretty minor changes to the text, either addressing any gaps, enhancing clarity of the way it's worded. But there's a couple of issues that we've pulled out that we just highlight here today. The first of those relates to the vision, the pillars, and the priorities of the strategy. There was a lot of support for them overall, that we're covering the right issues, so that's really encouraging. There are a number of responses that sort of indicate we might need to give further thought to how they are worded, how we can maybe make them more specific, more measurable, maybe improve the clarity of the language that we're using. There are some questions raised around how realistic some of them are. For example, the priority on 0 fatalities, accessibility for all. So we might want to think about those as we're moving towards the final version. There are also some requests to deal with additional issues within the priorities, particularly regional local growth opportunities, particularly reducing the need to travel, and the importance of protecting the environment. So we might want to consider the priorities that we've got and these suggested gaps as we're moving forward. One of the questions we asked was whether any of the priorities are more important than the other. Most people think one or other priority is more important, but the response varies a bit more. But the one that comes out predominantly is reducing carbon emissions, and the contribution to net zero is for those that express the priority, that comes out as strong, with some people feeling that the strategy is not quite ambitious enough in that regard. The second theme that we've pulled out, and this is due to the number of responses we received on this particular issue, it relates to new road proposals, particularly the support in the draft for dualling the A96 Aberdeen to Inverness, and also reference to improving road links through or around Dundee. The main concern that's raised in comments is the conflict of these proposals with wider priorities to reduce carbon emissions, to improve safety and make best use of existing infrastructure. In relation to the A96 dualling, a number of views were expressed that we should be reconsidering options to reconsider dualling along the existing alignment rather than a new alignment. So that rather than removing the option altogether, there was a shift that people were wanting to see a reconsideration of a dualling along the existing alignment. And it was really just because of, at the time of writing, we'd had such a number of responses on this issue. We felt we should raise it here to provide that opportunity for discussion. I should add that since then, or I think it was at the end of October, Transport Scotland and the Cabinet Secretary have provided an update on the A96 dualling proposal, stating that they have re-looked at the option of dualling along the existing alignment and have reconfirmed their decision to eliminate that option at this point. So we will need to take on board all of that as we move forward, and just think about, I think, how we're wording what we're including within the strategy and how we're phrasing it. The third theme, really, just to say, Aberdeen, the proposals around Aberdeen Rapid Transit, there was really significant support for those in the responses. There was some detailed comments on the detail of it, but overall there was some really good support for that. In relation to active travel, the inclusion of active travel as a main theme is really strongly supported. I think the comments really were around strong support for measures that improve the connectivity for pedestrians and cyclists, particularly joined up and segregated provision. There were some concerns raised that the proposals don't quite go far enough, perhaps, they're perhaps not ambitious enough. And also some responses highlighting a need to have greater consideration for things like e-bikes and e-scooters. So perhaps need to give some consideration to those one a bit more detail as we're moving forward. In relation to rail, there was really general support for the rail proposals that are contained within the draft, including additional stations. The view came through that improving reliability is more important than journey times on the longer distance routes. There were also comments around perhaps there's a bit of a gap, or we don't go quite into enough detail on ambitions for electrification, and also some responses expressing disappointment that the reopening of the rail line to Ellen is not included, or further north is not included within the draft. So that was overall general support, but a few issues that we might need to think through. The sixth issue that we've pulled out from the responses received is around the balance of urban versus rural issues. There were a number of responses highlighting a concern that the strategy as it is too urban focused, and that we need to better reflect the issues of rural areas, and the solutions are not always the same. So that's particularly around availability of public transport as a viable option in rural areas, and maybe something that we might need to just review in the final version to see whether we feel that we've got that balance right. Again, under rural issues, there was also strong support for cycling and active travel connections between communities, and the role that can play in improving accessibility. So overall, that was really positive. And the seventh key issue that we've highlighted here relates to demand responsive transport and shared transport. We had a number of respondents highlighting that we could be stronger on issues such as shared transport. Perhaps it warrants its own section within the strategy, which it doesn't have at the moment. It is there. It's just maybe needs to be pulled out to be a bit more prominent. And that proposals for mobility as a service could potentially be further developed, thinking about both benefits for both urban and rural areas. So we've pulled out these themes because they were either felt that they were important to the overall direction of the strategy, or we've received a number of responses around about those areas. So what we've done is we've logged all of the individual comments. As I say, some of them are more detailed than others, and we'll now take some time to go through those all in much more detail and respond to each of the comments in turn. We will highlight how we're considering it, how we're proposing to change the strategy if we are, and we will provide a summary of how we've dealt with that and publish it in due course. We have arranged a member officer working group for the 24th of November, and that's now in the calendar, just to go through, I suppose, the proposed changes or how we want to see the strategy change. And it's intended that we would bring back a further report in to the board in December on the progress and potential changes to the strategy. There is a question I was going to ask about whether the board would feel a workshop at that point would be beneficial. We've had them in the past when we were talking about the priorities, and we've had a number of them, which I think have been quite useful over the process. So there's an opportunity there for a workshop associated with that board meeting. And then following that, we would look to finalise the strategy, and then once the board are content, submit that to the Cabinet Secretary. So, and following all of that, as part of the SEA process, we would also then be producing a post-adoption SEA post-adoption statement. So the recommendations of the report really are to note the comments that we've received on the strategy. There's an opportunity to discuss, I suppose, any issues that have been raised, and also whether a workshop would be beneficial in December. Thank you.
Thank you very much, hand up first.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chair. And Kirsty, thank you very much for that report. That was very, very comprehensive, and a huge amount of work, I know, has gone into preparing it. So really, genuinely, thanks for that. I'm not surprised there's been the feedback on the A96 and the existing route through Inverurie. That issue is extremely controversial and is not going to go away in a hurry. So we'll have to look carefully at our response to all of that. And the other thing I was going to say was that I know that you've only just today, I think, received the final formal version of the response from Aberdeenshire, for which I apologise. It should have come. It hasn't. There's no substantial changes to what you had before, but it has at last come through. So apologies for that. And finally, yes, I think a workshop would be a very good idea for the board. It's a really good opportunity to have a free and easy kind of informal discussion around these issues. And it's such an important one. The RTS is such an important piece of the work we do that I think it justifies completely a workshop. So let's arrange that.
Yeah, I see there was something popped up in the chat there from, I think it was Councillor Hutchison as well, saying that would be a good thing. Ms. Bochel, I think you were next.
Yeah, thank you. I was pretty much going to say the same thing. I think it's great that we actually got this kind of level of response for something that's really quite strategic, and that the comments are helpful and just challenging some of what we're suggesting. So although I'm not sure I have the answers in my head yet as to how I would respond to them, I think it's good that we're being asked those questions. And I think particularly if we're considering making any even reasonably significant changes to the strategy as a result of that, then a workshop would be a really valuable way of working through them. So.
Thanks very much. I then have Mr. Anana.
Sorry, just switch off my microphone. Yeah, again, that's, you know, getting the reports and the summarising the reports in as really quickly has been absolutely fantastic, and really glad to see the number of the groups and the sort of diversity of the groups coming through there. And, you know, from my own particular side, absolutely delighted that there's a strong feeling about active travel being important. One thing I was just scanning through the report, there was a couple of mentions of north of Ellen where I am, and I think it's worth noting that that area does feel quite neglected recently. Since the AWPR has finished, and there's been a lot of temporary repairs and things done around that area, which is totally snarled up some of these roads around there. And I think it's important that that area is considered for the traffic going on from where the dual carriageway finishes at Ellen and going on to Peterhead, and the economic part of that journey, the number of lorries that are still on that road going up there. I'd just like to put that forward. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Bell, you were next.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions. First one is relating to mobility as a service. So looking at the question, really, page 36, it was actually asking about car clubs, mobility as a service, and so on. And what was identified was that some of the proposals around mobility as a service felt unambitious and needs to be further developed. And I wondered if officers have a little more to what that actually means.
Ms. Chalmers?
Yeah, I think when it comes to the feeling that it's maybe unambitious, I mean, although we have referenced mobility as a service and things, and I think it perhaps doesn't go into enough detail. I suspect they're actually looking for things like demand responsive transport. There's a recognition. There's quite a strong sort of feeling within some of the comments that bus services are not the most appropriate way to necessarily serve rural areas. So I think demand responsive transport provision is probably a key part of that. But there was also a recognition that it's not necessarily just a solution for rural areas, that we need to consider it in both an urban and a rural context. And as I say, although it is referenced within the draft strategy, and things like car sharing and lift sharing, which banner of mobility as a service, they are all mentioned within the strategy, but possibly they could be pulled together into one section that specifically deals with those issues, rather than under, for instance, behaviour change or rural issues. So I think it's probably more a case of bringing it all together into one defined sort of package of measures, and maybe just strengthening some of what we mean. I mean, I think at the moment we don't have that specific project particularly, but it would be providing that hook to develop things like that in the future.
Thank you, because I'm wondering if possibly something like co-wheels, electric vehicles would might be part of this mobility as a service bigger picture, because that leads on to Appendix B, and let me get this right. So it was answer 8:15 brackets XV brackets 15, public transport cost, and the feeling was that public transport was far too expensive, and that it should be considered to be taken into public ownership. Also, there's overlying underlying theme, of reducing carbon footprint. And I'm wondering if those two themes of mobility as a service, electric cars, co-wheels possibly, and rather than having buses, or people who can actually jump into their little electric vehicles and cost them nothing to use. I mean, that's me being a little sort of cynical possibly, but I'm just wondering how those two answers could possibly fit together properly. They seem slightly at odds.
I mean, I think that's perhaps the issue that we maybe need to address in how we're sort of phrasing all of this within the draft strategy. I think all of the things that you've mentioned are absolutely part of that package, if you will, I suppose, and lift share and co-wheels and electric and sort of low emission vehicles. I think it is maybe just about how we're pulling it all together into one one sort of definable package that you can look at the strategy and say, right, this is what we're going to be doing for, sort of shared transport. I'm just looking for the specific comments on it. I hadn't quite managed to locate them just yet. So, but as I say, we can go into more detail on the very specific comments. And as this is a summary of some of the key themes that are coming out. So perhaps when we go back in and have a little bit look at detail of specifically what individuals have said, we can maybe come up with some suggestions on that.
Right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I've got Mr. Ross next. Can I ask Colin, could you just switch off your microphone because you're, thank you. Ian.
Thanks, Chair. I received the October update from Transport Scotland because I had on the A96 because I'd attended one of the events, and it was interesting. It was good to get feedback. I didn't see much in it about commitment or dates or anything very specific. And I don't mean necessarily action on the ground. I just mean taking the process forward. I wondered if Kirsty was able to add anything to that, please.
I suspect I'm perhaps not the best person to answer that question. I'm hoping maybe Rab might know a little bit more.
Mr. Dixon, are you able to assist with that?
Thanks, Kirsty. That's called the hospital pass. Rugby. Yeah, I mean, I saw the letters, Ian, and yeah, they're not very committal in terms of dates. You're probably aware that they had committed to a preferred alignment by the end of 2019. And because of the volume of comments and consultations, that was deferred to early 2020 and has just come out in the last week. So I think it's fair to say that they've been caught up by the number and volume and quality of the responses, has pushed them back a bit, but also I think probably put them back in terms of their thinking. They need to really think about what the options are, what they're trying to achieve, and what the best way forward are. Again, in terms of hospital passes, I don't know whether you and Wallace might even be better than me, but I think the truth is there isn't a set date from Transport Scotland, but they do imply that they're fairly close to the next stage of the process.
Thank you, Kirsty and Rob. Certainly more hospital passes there than there were on Saturday down in Wales.
Thanks for that. Councillor Hutchison, you're next.
Yep, hi. I was just to ask, firstly, thanks for talking us through all of that. Just because of the number of comments we've got in compared to usual, and like even just the summary is quite comprehensive and there's a lot in that to take in and to respond to. I was just to ask, is obviously this suggesting it comes back in a month's time, is that going to be enough time to fully address all that? So is there the likelihood of maybe a bit more time being needed just to ask about that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that undoubtedly there's a lot to go through. We need to go through all the individual comments. I think in December it's likely that it will be we've managed to go through all of these consultations, and these are some of the proposals that we think will need to be changed. I don't expect it will be a presentation of a proposed final document, but I think it's an opportunity to discuss some proposed changes and just check that everyone's happy with those before we then go on to finalise it. But yeah, you're right, it's very tight timescales. So, and as I say, we've got a member officer working group at 24th of November where I think we're hoping to go through, in a bit more detail some of the key changes that we might need to make.
Thank you very much. That's welcome.
Councillor Gile and Bell, you both have your hand up. I don't know if that's legacy hands waving or new ones.
Legacy, yeah, cool.
Just wanted to wave, actually, Councillor Chair. Sorry.
Can I ask about how we get, that out, Kirsty, because you mentioned that things would go out on the website. Is there any expectation that you're going back to those individuals and organisations to give an individual response, or is that something that you've factored in?
No, it's not the intention to go back and provide an individual response, but what we are what we are planning to do is and we have to be cautious about attributing comments to individuals where they've expressed us, that they don't want us to do that. But we would take out all of the individual comments, and we will provide a response to those individuals. And I think we will provide that summary on the Nestrans 2040 website, so it's available and people are able to see how we've reviewed the comments, how we've changed or not the strategy. But I don't propose individually responding to each of the respondents, but we would make that information available.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fine and the right approach to take. I just think we need to make that clear and to manage expectation of that, so that is useful. And I don't know how the workshop will work, but I think there is support for that, and we can maybe look at having breakout rooms as well as having a full suite of people on at the same time, so that we can maybe manage it better. But that's maybe something to have a look at. I don't know if Teams does that, but there are other platforms that do that. So maybe that's something that your team can have a look at.
Okay.
I don't have any more hands up on regional transport strategy. So thank you for that. Can we agree effectively to note the comments received so far and to come back together on the 9th of December for a workshop?
Great.
Thank you. If we move then on the agenda to the e-cargo bikes project, I think that's Mrs. Laird, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, so as the board will probably be aware, the Aberdeen City Council was given funds at the start of the year to complement the work on low emission zones to procure and manage a series of electric cargo bikes. It's part of a pilot scheme to provide an alternative to vans for local deliveries. It was agreed that Nestrans would manage the procurement and operation of this scheme. This is because it was working, it complemented what we were doing within the freight distribution strategy through the Civitas Portus project. This report in 5.1 is a snapshot of a larger report that was submitted to Transport Scotland at the end of September, and which is available on the Nestrans website. There is a link to it. That includes some extra conclusions as well as some a summary and analysis of the impacts, particularly due to COVID. However, to be able to provide a few early indications from the project, being aware that this is still only partway through its first year, since May, 3 of the bikes have been in regular use, with 2 being loaned in May and 1 being loaned in June. So these are in use by Seafine, Pauldinos and Fargo's Cargo. These are the companies that we currently have data on up until the end of August for all of them, but we're now getting for the end of September and October as well. As of September, we've also loaned the 4th cargo bike to Aberdeen City Council's Countryside Rangers. And they've now started submitting data for that as well. And the request is that all of the companies that are doing this pilot are providing data on the number of miles that they're taking, which we're able to transfer into amount saved compared to using a standard commonly used van, which it shows the miles, the carbon, and as well the fuel savings. At the end of the report, you can see that to the end of September, the trial has enabled a transfer of 910 miles from the equivalent of had the companies been using vans. And this has showed a carbon reduction of over 40 kilograms, 470 grams of nitrogen dioxide, over 20 grams of PM10 particulate matters, and a fuel cost saving to users estimated at around £70. Although I will caveat that the fuel cost was based off of pre-COVID fuel figures. An update to this report since it was written, we have also had a successful application from the Haven in Stonehaven. Now, this is slightly different because although this pilot was intended to be purely for Aberdeen City Centre based businesses, because of the impacts that we found through COVID and because we've had 2 bikes that were currently still available for use, we have deemed it appropriate to be able to use one of those bikes outside of Aberdeen City Centre, at least until or unless there becomes an uptake in the number of companies wishing to use them. But this should be interesting because it's a different environment for the bike to be used. It will be good for the Haven and Stonehaven to use this, and they're picking up the bike tomorrow. But yes, there's more information available on the wider report on the Nestrans website, but I'm happy to take any questions in the meantime.
Thanks very much for that. Rab, you wanted to come in?
Thanks, Nikki. Just to emphasise that it's not the Haven Fish and Chip Shop. It's a third sector, I think a food bank really, who are providing deliveries in the local area at the moment.
Yes, it's a food bike working in tandem with the cooperative in Stonehaven.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hutchison, you wanted to come in?
Yep, there we go. I was just to check with these e-bikes. Just, am I right in thinking you'd be allowed to use these through the kind of pedestrian and cycle area on Union Street, and to quite helpful in getting around a few, or not getting around, going through some of the spaces people interventions as opposed to having to go right around them?
Yes, and we have had feedback from Paul Dino's because obviously they are impacted by the spaces for people on the use of the bikes through the currently pedestrianised areas. We actually have 2 different types of cargo bikes in use, as I said in the report. The Christianias are pretty large, the Riesenmullers are a bit smaller. Whilst both can be used on shared paths and cycleways, the Riesenmullers are a little bit better set up for sort of, because they're slimmer, it's easier for them to sort of go through those areas, whereas the Christianias are far better suited for being on the road, given that they're trikes.
Yeah, and just kind of follow on from that, I know a few businesses that have maybe raised concerns about access to the business and the access they've got to the business due to space for people. Has there been any kind of coordination with the council to try and identify them and maybe see if they could benefit from these bikes at all?
I mean, we have been approaching companies, particularly following the impact of coronavirus, and we did get a bit of interest. It's just been transferring the interest into applications, because one of the other big considerations for them is storage of the bikes, particularly that the ones that we have left, the Christianias, are 1 metre wide by 2 metres long. They're not small, but I believe Gail might be able to provide a bit more information.
No, it was just to say that we have been marketing them as well through the business advice that we've been providing as part of Spaces for People, and certainly when we were in complete lockdown and companies were running takeaway services, there was a fair bit of interest, and we had a couple of sort of short-term loans, but in terms of sort of an ongoing sort of user, so that we can properly evaluate it. It has been quite tricky, just because of the nature of the circumstances we find ourselves in. So it's been great that Paul Dino's have been able to have a really good go at it, and we're always open for more people to express an interest.
And I would like to say that Paul Dino's in particular, Fargo's as well to an extent, both of them came out of, because of the changes due to coronavirus, Paul Dino's in particular, it was purely because they had to change their operating structure. So they were put on a short-term contract to begin with, and have now decided that actually they would like to keep it for the entire year. We haven't had any companies who, even when they said they wanted to do it short-term, haven't then extended the contract. And I expect the same with any other companies that show an interest in the future, because the main feedback that we've had is, regardless of how well the savings are or how good they are, people are having a lot of fun on these bikes. One of my favourite quotes from Paul Dino's was that the first time he rode it, he went up a hill and laughed the whole way because it just felt so effortless. And that's the kind of thing we really want to push, is these are genuinely fun to ride, these bikes.
I was just one other follow-up, just kind of tying in with later in the papers. It's got the outline of what's been in the press in the last in the last month or so, and I don't see any mention of the e-bikes in there. Is it maybe worth trying to speak to some of the local papers, maybe try and get Paul Dino's or the likes on board as well, and just try and talk up like what Paul Dino's experience has been to date, and maybe kind of get a wee bit almost free advertising in the paper about these and stating that there's still some available if other businesses are interested.
I know that there was something in the papers, but where we actually did have Paul Dino's and the other companies currently in use giving their experiences. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head when that was, though.
I remember it. Nicola. It was quite early on when we put the interventions in, and you're absolutely right. There was a good bit of the paper with photos and so on. And actually, at the same time, the Lord Provost was in Belmont Street, and when it was all happening, and he was able to go and speak to Paul Dino's as well. But I think it's a point well made that you know, what would I think bring this whole story to life is the experiences of those companies and individuals who have used the bike. So you know, I think that is something that we should look into and focus on, and really if you know, if we want to sell them and you have that going out there, that they are great fun and all the rest of it. I think that's a really good idea to do that.
Yes, because we do still have one bike available. So if anyone here wants a bike for a business that they know of, we've got one available.
And we shouldn't forget that, you know, there are other bikes in and around the region that are being used as well. This is a particular project we're doing, but you know, some companies use e-bikes already. Councillor Bell, you wanted to come in?
Thank you, Chair. So there are two bicycle types. There's a three-wheeler, which is I think that's the Christiania, and then there's the longer two-wheeler like the Reese and Muller. So I'm looking here. Just really what I was going to ask you was which bikes had the greatest take-up? Was it the Christiania or the Reese and Muller? The reason I asked that is because you know, if you're sort of traveling around town, maybe a three-wheeler is more appropriate. And I notice here that the Reese and Muller bike, it averaged 60 miles the first month, but because of injury, it only managed 35 miles for the next month. I wonder if it was so unwieldy that the rider just fell off and hurt himself.
The rider didn't hurt himself with the bike, it was entirely separate. And the other Reese and Muller is running an average of 105 miles a month. We've actually found that, and I think it's in the report actually, the full report, that looking back, we immediately assumed that the cargo trikes would be easier because there was less of a learning curve to be able to ride them. They're a lot more stable, particularly at slow speeds, whereas the cargo bikes are great and very nimble, a lot more nimble than the trikes, but there's a bit more of a barrier there in the fact that you're having to balance the load until you're going at speed. In practice, we've actually found that more people wanted the Reese and Mullers than the Christianias, and we've actually had at least one user who said, actually, I wanted the Reese and Muller, but I'll try the Christiania for the moment and we'll see how we get on. Mainly because the Reese and Mullers are more nimble. They're more They're longer than the average bike, but they're not much wider, which means that they're easier to store. So looking back, we would maybe say actually the fears about people being scared to ride these cargo bikes is not as much as you think it would be, and actually for any other place wanting to do this, I would recommend that they look into getting a good range of that kind, rather than thinking, well, people will want the trikes because they're bigger, they're easier to ride, and they carry more. Because we're finding that although the Christianias are getting well used from the companies that are using them, they're still not. None of the bikes are anywhere near getting filled to capacity. But of course, the two bike types are good for different things, which is why we're finding that a lot of the places that are wanting the Christianias, it's bigger items that they're wanting to use. The Countryside Rangers, it's them with their equipment. Seafine, it's them with food parcels. But yeah, but they're two very different beasts. But no, it was definitely not that he hurt himself falling off the bike.
Thank you
very much for that.
Yeah, I just may to say as well, please, Chair, that there are 6 hydrogen assisted cargo bikes arriving. Well, it'll be very much the end of this year now. And they've got a range of 300 kilometres each. So you know, when they turn up, we'll perhaps go and talk to Nikki, and see if she can actually get some users for them for us. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that. So just to note the report, members are happy to do that. Thank you. Right, on to 5.2, and I think it's Kelly Wiltshire to do this one.
Yes, thanks, Chair. This is just to give you our annual overview of our climate change reporting duties. You'll be aware that Nestrans as a public body has a responsibility under the Climate Change Act to report on our annual emissions. We need to report to the Scottish Government by the end of this month for our 18-19 emissions. So that's basically our emissions up to March this year. So COVID-19 hasn't really affected our emissions so far this year, because we were really only in lockdown for about 2 weeks of it, so it hasn't really come through in the figures, but obviously next year will be a different matter altogether. We've obviously got the table there. It's just to note that when it says 0 for the tons of CO2 emissions or equivalent, that is basically because on the Scottish Government spreadsheet that we need to put in, they don't do more. If it's more than a decimal point, it's only 2 decimal points they go to. So if it is more than that, it might be 0.00 something. It won't be included, and we'll just turn up a 0 because the figure will be so small that they're saying that it's negligible, it's not worth reporting. So it probably, we do have perhaps some kilograms worth of emissions, but it's so small that it's not actually showing up on the Scottish Government website. One thing that has changed from previous reporting is that we started a food waste collection during the midway between 18-19. So I think we had about 20 weeks worth of collection before lockdown. So we have figures for organic food and waste this year, which has gone to composting, which we didn't have in previous years. And also in the 18-19, we didn't have any domestic flights. We only had short haul flights. So domestic flights is when it's within the UK, and short haul is going out to Europe. So there was 4 short haul flights last year. So that's why there was no figure for the domestic. Otherwise, as I say, it should be fairly self-explanatory. As I say, a lot of the reasons that there have been reductions, as you can see, the numbers haven't necessarily changed that much year on year. It's often to do with the emission factors. So the fact that the grid is much cleaner, it's got a lot more renewables on it. So even the same amount of electricity used the year before, the energy in terms of tons of CO2 is less. So that's why there is a lot of change. A lot of it is to do with the emission factors. And it was also, just for clarification, how we get these figures is that Nestrans rents 20% of Archibald Simpson House, and as such we claim 20% of the emissions from the building. We don't have a smart meter in the building, so these figures are not exact. They are basically 20% of what the total building has used in terms of electricity and water and so on. The transport ones are much more accurate because we log them centrally within ourselves, within our team. But in terms of the electricity and water and the waste, they're aggregates for the whole building, with the exception of food waste, which is just us. If anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy to take them.
Apologies, that was my house phone going off. Can I ask for questions? I don't have any. So can we note the annual report that we get? Thank you very much for taking us through that and for your report.
No problem.
If we go on now to the rail update at item 6.1, back to you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Councillor MacDonald. A quick run through some of the updates on rail. First one, we got the item there is a derailment at Carmont. I think people, although the report was written before we had the news that the rail line has reopened. It reopened yesterday. ScotRail are running services as to their COVID emergency timetable. I think LNER kicked off their services from midday yesterday. I understand that the sleeper service will be starting again on Thursday. So good to see the resumption of services south of Aberdeen through to Dundee and further from there. The next item there is Kintore Station, and again a lovely piece of news that the entry into service was achieved on the morning of the 15th of October. Some of us were mad enough to get up very early to be there for the first train or depart from the first train. And it was despite the fact that the Cabinet Minister wasn't able to come up to the event. Later on that morning, we had a nice gathering of elected members of the community and some officers, and we were able to celebrate what has been a successful project and something that has been ongoing for a long time, and which I think the campaign for Kintore goes right back to the 80s, and it has been sort of handed on like a baton across different boards and committees and officers to the point where we had the opening. So yeah, great news on that one as well. The next item there is just a bit of progress on the Aberdeen to Lawrencekirk Strategic Corridor Study, which is again one of our LRDF grant applications to Scottish Government, Transport Scotland Local Rail Development Fund. Although we're looking at the rail line south of Aberdeen to Lawrencekirk, it also includes the wider strategic corridor on the road and the strategic active travel links as well. An executive summary that's been submitted to Transport Scotland is attached to this ball paper, which outlines the case for change, the problems, issues, constraints and opportunities. It lists the objectives and also lists a long list of options that we want to proceed at the next stage of the process if we get through this next gateway. And that includes, as I say, strategic active travel, park and ride improvements, rail station reopenings, and also links between potential interchange points and the wider network, as well as bus improvements as well. So yeah, we're taking a multimodal approach to that particular corridor. We've got an update there about the long-running inch accessibility study as well. Again, members will be aware that that is also another of the Nestrans Local Rail Development Fund projects. We again have submitted comments to Transport Scotland. Yes, again, they have come back with some comments and we've addressed those comments, and we have looking forward to a phone call with Transport Scotland and their representatives on Friday, I think, in order to help resolve and continue to push that very important and long-standing project on in terms of agreement of the final options for appraisal and the completion of that important work. And then the final item there is just notification that the cross-country franchise has been extended for another couple of years by the Department for Transport. That's been leased Arriva Trains run that franchise. There's some details there about it, but they operate 2 departures daily. People will be aware of the almost the iconic Aberdeen to Penzance route that they run, but also they run a shorter service on a daily basis down to Edinburgh, and there's return trips as well. So a few bits of news in terms of the rail updates, and happy to take questions on anything in the report. Thank you.
Questions and comments. I've got Councillor Argyle first, and then Councillor Carr.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. First of all, on Kintor, I was one of those fortunate enough to be able to go along for the opening bit when not at 6 o'clock in the morning. I left that to others. I'm not aware that such a time actually exists in the real world. But no, the morning session was absolutely fantastic, and as Paul said, to actually be there at a station that we've been talking about for as long as I've been a councillor, and of course the conversation started before that, and probably actually started from the moment that the station was closed. The aspiration of the community has been to see it back again. So to be actually there on the day was fantastic. It was a pity that the minister, or the cabinet secretary rather, couldn't attend, but I think we managed quite well without him, and it was a really very good day. Sorry about that. Secondly, on the Aberdeen Lawrence Kirk multimodal study, very interesting reading, and clearly a lot of work going into that and more to come. So that I think is tremendous. It's always a very good thing, I think, when we look at a corridor like that, and it is clearly a hugely important corridor. When we look at that in a multimodal way and look at all the transport issues and challenges, I just would put in a plea that we need to keep an eye on the ball when it comes to additional stations along there. That I think will be important. And finally, Chair, if I may, on the subject of Inch, it's good to see progress moving, I think, slowly, but at least the conversation is still going on. We do need to get that resolved, and we do need to continue to push on that. And I'm sure, Paul, if there's anything that we can do as politicians to help you with that after your conversation on Friday, we will be more than happy to do that. It's something I've been shouting for a very long time, and others as well. So we really do need to get that resolved. Thanks. Sorry about the background noise. I've got plumbers and things in the house.
Thanks very much for that. Councillor Carr.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just following the comments from Peter there. Certainly in the Aberdeen Lawrence Kirk corridor, I would agree with most of the comments that he's made, but we do need to have some greater emphasis on the different transport options down there, because we certainly have seen a fairly substantial withdrawal of public transport options for people, particularly in the rural areas and the hinterland around that corridor. And as it says in the report, we've got a very high car usage index from some of those areas, and that would be the reason why. So I think we really need to be looking at different options there. Maybe demand responsive, to my mind, is probably the key there, because I know public transport itself has got its own challenges. Peter also mentioned the opening of additional stations, which fully I agree with as well, particularly with Chapelton adjacent to Newton Hill. Absolutely an opportunity there. But however, the rail timetabling is crucial, and we've seen a bit of a retraction since Lawrence Kirk station opened, where people no longer find it appropriate for intersecting journeys further south. They've got to either travel to Montrose and wait there. That's a disincentive to people to use the rail network. So I think some of these things have to be addressed as well. So timetabling is crucial, and I know the Scottish Government wanted to reduce journey times between Aberdeen and the main destinations, but that's been at the expense of some of the rural commuter journeys. So I think it is important that we pay some attention to make sure everybody gets a fair deal from rail. Okay, thanks, Paul, and well done on the report.
Thanks, Paul. To maybe comment on?
Yeah, again,
I recognise we're getting on in time. Yeah.
That's okay. All valid points and well made. Just in respect to the issues at southbound from the Mains on the rail, we've got a great local rail service going north from these areas, but as you mentioned, the ability to go south is curtailed. There is a complementary project that Transport Scotland are working on related to the City Region deal, which is about improvements between Aberdeen and Central Belt. That is not only about improving the intercity reliability and journey speeds, they are actually hoping to resolve that issue as part of that project by extending the local stopping service south of Lawrence Kirk, so it doesn't stop at Montrose, but also continues through to Montrose, which again will be of a benefit in terms of that connectivity, and they're looking to improve that connectivity. The key question is obviously about pace and delivery and timescales. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. If we could move on, members, to the agenda 7. Okay. Ian.
Yeah, it was just a question which Paul, thank you, Chair, question which Paul might be able to just clarify. And Councillor Carr mentioned Chapelton and Newton Hill Station in relation to the Lawrence Kirk Corridor study. I notice in the rail potential section it talks about a new station, potentially a new station at Cove Bay and Newton Hill. Does it actually mean a new station at Newton Hill? Because previously I think it was more to do with reopening the Newton Hill station.
I would say the engineering study has been undertaken which looked at the location of the previous station and found that if you were going to provide a facility in Newton Hill, because of the track alignments and some of the other constraints, had the highest potential for the provision of a new station. So a new station, reopened station, I guess that is what we're using interchangeably at this point in time before we actually have to fix on a particular location. It would appear that the best opportunity would be on the site of the former location. So I guess you'd call that a reopening, but one would expect that the standard of facilities at that location would have to be greater, and there'd have to be detailed consideration of car parking and access along those lines.
Yeah, good, thanks.
Thanks very much for that. On then to well, to make just to note those recommendations, just to finish off 6.1. I think I expected that. Agreed. On to 7.1 then, and any questions on the progress report which we have in front of us in its various sections. Michael Hutchison first.
Hi there. It was just on page 90 of my report pack to do with the support measures to improve access to port facilities. Specifically to do with, one of my colleagues asked me a little bit about this, specifically to do with the Aberdeen Harbour and the link road for that. So let me get my questions up here. So I understand this was meant to be done in the summer. It's now been pushed back to kind of November, December time. Right in thinking that in the firstly.
Mr. Dixon? Rob, too far.
I think probably Paul would field that one rather than myself. Thanks.
Yeah, again, this is the project is external links to Aberdeen South Harbour. It had been awarded funding from the City Region deal, and the appraisal had been delayed because of the necessity actually to understand in more detail some of the aspirations that were coming up from the adjacent energy transition zone. As you know, that's located adjacent to the harbour. Some of the options that had been identified were interfacing in that general area. So the opportunity was taken to make sure that we fully understood the aspirations of the energy transition zone and the emerging local development plan prior to then taking that forward for reporting and consultation. So we're back on track. We are hoping to go to consultation in November, towards the end of this month, perhaps into early December, and then to be reporting that through City Growth and Resources, hopefully in February. So that's where we are with that. And yeah, so we've got some options. The appraisal's just been completed, and yeah, we're looking forward to being able to continue to progress that in conjunction with the Harbour Board and the communities in that area.
Yeah, so going back to, so on the energy transition zone, is that likely to have a significant impact upon what's being proposed then, or has it looking like that's going to have a significant impact on what's going to happen, or is it?
There were prior to at the initial stages of the appraisal, route options were identified, and this was prior to the further development of the energy transition zone that impacted on St Fittick's Park. There were options that went near to the landfill site, and there are also options that used the coast road via Hareness and Suter Head, and they were actually identified and scoped out a couple of years ago. So between and they were consulted on at that time. The energy transition zone has obviously built up some momentum into the council's net zero aspirations and the working with Opportunity North East, and so it was important to understand where the business case for the energy transition zone was going, and we've been able to understand that. We've been able to understand what sort of facilities that might entail, what sort of land take they might be interested in, and what sort of traffic generation that might impact as well, because as that's adjacent to the harbour, all that would impact on the route options and also the capabilities of that route. So that's why we've sort of taken that into account.
Okay, and then just going back to the consultation itself, I've got a couple, like one of my colleagues represents the area. They've raised a few concerns about the local communities maybe not being as engaged with online consultations as they have been with more traditional consultations. And they've also maybe raised a wee bit concern about the timing, because it's kind of November, December time, that consultations over that time period in general are probably a little bit less as well, just because you've got Christmas, you've got things on. He was asking if is there maybe any scope to kind of either ensure this is much better publicised, or is it maybe scope to kind of extend the consultation a bit so it takes some of it a bit more away from that Christmas period when folk have got a bit more time to respond to these things and consider them in depth?
Yeah. I mean, that could well be, and possibly what we would need to do is, I know that there are specific community liaison officers whom the city council employ for the communities in that area, both Torry and also up to Cove. So perhaps what we can commit to do is to making sure that we in with those community liaison officers, and also take on the points that you've just raised there about the publicity and the timing, to see if we can maximise the participation of that. So yeah, there's several areas that you've just suggested, and I'm not the project manager for it, although I take an overview, and perhaps that's something that we can further discuss and make sure that the points that you raise are taken into account, because they're very important. Because what's the point of having a consultation where people don't feel that they've had the opportunity to contribute or to get involved?
Yeah, so would I be able to get, so maybe just because I'm going to ask about this as well, is it possible to get a bit assurances about that there will be likely an extension of the consultation period, or would you be able to get, or is there kind of is there a strong likelihood that consultation period could be extended just to kind of ensure, because there's maybe less engagement over kind of November, December, that there'll be a bit longer at the end to catch folk?
I can understand exactly your concerns, Councillor Hutchison, about that, but as I'm not the actual project manager for that task, I feel slightly uneasy about giving strong commitment at this point. But I think it's very important what you're saying there is. I think we'll just have to make sure we would need to understand the end point gives us sufficient maximum consultation, but also to finalise the reporting so that we can make sure that the committee is able to consider that. whilst also maximising the opportunity for that. So I understand exactly where you're coming from. I would want to, before I gave a commitment, have firmer understanding about the timescales that are required for the reporting and the endpoint of the consultation before I made a commitment. And I would want to make that commitment in line with the project, the people who are actually project managing the scheme at the City Council.
I see that Gail, Ms. Beattie's got her hand up. So perhaps if I take her in now, just to perhaps answer that for you, Mike.
Yeah, it was just to say that obviously this is a project that's been run through the city as part of the city region deal. So the governance around it sits within the City Council's gift rather than within Nestrans. But that's certainly something that can be reflected back to the project team, and we can certainly look at that in relation to any communication that wants to come through to the City Council. I think it's a little unfair to ask Nestrans to commit to that because it's not within their gift.
Yeah. Would you be able to come back to me then and just let me know if an extension would be possible?
Yeah, we'll certainly
conversations.
Yeah, Paul and I will certainly reflect those views back. So we're happy to do that and say that that's something that was asked about, and to give you a bit more of an update on what the consultation plan is going to say.
And I think it's for a consultation, it's not just about the length of the consultation; it's about how it's done and how well it, as you said earlier, that it's advertised and so on. And there's also that it is difficult for people to get together and do these things, but in some ways there are more opportunities with digital and virtual. But yeah, if do you want to come back in again, Gail?
No, sorry.
Okay. Yeah. So if we've got that commitment to have a look at that and get back to that, that should do that. I've next got Colin Allenach. Do you want to come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. At this point, I'd like to bring forward a motion to the board. Mark, I wonder if you could put that up on the screen, and then I'll explain why I want to bring this forward.
Perhaps you could just read it out for us, first of all, yeah. Colin.
So this is regarding the decision last week about removing the cycle lane from the beach, and it's wanting to really look at where we are as a board of Nestrans, based on the fact that we've got such a our future is active travel. A big part of our future is active travel. So I put this note together. So to note the progress report and instruct the director of Nestrans to write to the convener, Growth and Resources Committee of Aberdeen City Council, to express the board's disappointment of the decision taken to the committee on the 28th of October 2020 to remove the temporary cycle lanes at the beach esplanade, and to ask the committee to reconsider their decision at the earliest opportunity and to request that a consultation exercise be undertaken with the relevant stakeholders to review the future of the cycle lane. The reason I did that, put that together, is on page 94 on item A, mentions there that Grampian Cycle Partnership have been holding meetings virtually and giving feedback to council on spaces for people plans, which is true. But going back to Councillor Carr's point, unfortunately, when this decision was raised, there was no consultation with us, no feedback consideration, and it was a complete surprise to everyone. Somebody mentioned, using another transportation metaphor, is that we perhaps have missed the boat now, but really we didn't even know the boat was preparing to set sail for this. I think it's worth going back to considering what the Spaces for People money was actually given to the city for. There was two main reasons, as far as I've read on their website, and what was put in initially was to help people physically distance from each other and get about the city, but also to help people use active travel for exercise and for essential journeys safely. And I almost think that second part has been dropped from the agenda totally. I listened to the recording of the council meeting the other week, and it didn't seem to be coming out there was any mention of that. It was all about the physical distancing path. So removing that path, that cycle lane, is actually very much against that second principle of helping people use active travel. And again, sorry.
I thought you'd maybe finished, but carry on.
No, oh no. I'll try and get through quickly. I mean, looking at the path itself, everybody knew it wasn't perfect, and nobody likes the red and white bollards. But it actually did serve three purposes. First of all, it took the fast cyclists off the walkway, which we've always known as a problem. Secondly, it stopped the beach being used as a dual carriageway, so it stopped speeding down at the beach. And thirdly, it actually gave the cyclists somewhere safe to cycle on a segregated path. And again, removing that, we've just totally gone against being able to solve those issues. Going back to section 4.2 and the briefing paper about the significant uplift in active travel, and reflected in that infogram, this is going to knock that completely back. I can see. As I said, I know there's been issues with it, but I don't think that any of the issues that raised are unsurmountable. And with a bit of discussion between others, we could solve those issues. There's issues about it being confusing. There's a bit about communication, ugly, and I agree it's a temporary solution, but we can make it nicer. Issues with disabled people, but again, I think we can change that, change the design of that to make it accommodate everybody, and various other issues, but I don't think any of them are unsurmountable. Just trying to read my notes here on that. I think, I propose this motion because I think it's been a snap decision. We've put it up. If we take it down, it's under 2 months. It's a complete waste of time to ever have it in the past. I see this as an opportunity to design workable cycle lanes for the future of the city. We can change it, we can chop and change it, we can make it work for everybody. I think taking it down immediately, it just loses that opportunity to do it. So that's my motion brought forward, and I would like the board to consider that. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Colin, and I can utterly feel your disappointment. Thank you so much for articulating what you have done, and I think many of us would share a lot of what you say. I, like you, was lugging into the meeting when it happened, and I was not expecting that outcome either. But that's where we are, and that's what the decision of the elected members in the city did. So I'm going to bring in, I see Councillor Argyle's got his hand up, so I'll bring him first.
Thanks very much. Yes, I have been following this through the media. I've had obviously no direct involvement or connection with it. I have to say, though, I do have concern as a matter of principle about Nestrans writing in the terms that are being sought to one of the constituent authorities. I do not think that is Nestrans' role. This is absolutely an issue for Aberdeen City Council. There are other mechanisms that can be used to raise this by way of petition or whatever else, if there is a desire to get the City Council to change its position. I really do not think, and it's something we've never done as a Nestrans board, is write to a constituent member authority expressing disappointment with decisions that have been taken. It's just not what Nestrans is here to do. I would be very loath to see us going down this route now, which doesn't mean I don't have sympathy with Colin's position. I absolutely do. But I do think there are other means that, that need to be followed, and I don't think it would be appropriate for Nestrans to be brought into that debate. That's my fairly strongly held view, I have to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Hutchison.
Yep, it was just to feed into, I had the motion up and I've lost it now. There was part of the motion that was agreed to that was to feed into was to ask for comment plan going forward, and perhaps it might be better placed to feed these comments into that in terms of looking at a much longer term solution in terms of the beats rather than focusing on the site, rather than just focusing on the initial decision of the council about the space for people cycle lane. Apart from that, I'd also associate myself with Peter Giles' comments that he's made. That's what I've got.
Thanks. The process, I suppose, Colin, is that, you know, for that to be considered would need a seconder and so on. I'm not sure that's going to happen. I think your points have been exceptionally well made, and I get the sense from the board that you know, unless Councillor Bell, did you want to say something?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Can I ask whether the big concern is getting fast cyclists off the pavements? You mentioned that. Is that a serious concern?
I'm not sure we want to go into the debate. If I'm quite honest, from the chair.
Well, no, but actually, Chair, the point here is.
Are you thinking to second the motion? Or clarification? Is that what you're looking for, Councillor Bell?
I was wondering if possibly writing to Nestrans might be a more appropriate course of action. Is what I was going to say.
From my point of view, I think that is something that we could do. Again, I'm bow to the majority if it's something that Nestrans wants to do. I would imagine Nestrans are very interested in where their money is being spent on this. The initial bid, I think, included 3 cycle lanes, and we are down to no cycle lanes at the moment.
My understanding would be that would be for Aberdeen City Council to deal with. Councillor Argyle, you wanted to come in?
Yes, just very briefly, it is worth reflecting that the purpose behind space for temporary interventions to deal with the public health issues around the pandemic. That was what Spaces for People is for, and that's what it is about. The broader issue around cycle lanes within the city, or indeed in Aberdeenshire for that matter, the balance between pedestrians and drivers and all of these things are a separate issue, and I don't think we need to conflate the two. And that's what concerns me. I think we need to say thank you very much to Colin for raising the issue, but take no further action on it.
Okay, so where are we? I see there's stuff in the chat that I haven't been able to really get my head around. So Colin, or is there anybody going to second Colin's proposal to do that? Otherwise, I'd be just going with the recommendations in the report, which is just to note them. In that case, I think Colin, that the board will go with the recommendation in the report, just to note. But thank you for making your views known to us.
And thanks for. Thank you.
Okay, if we could move on, members, to the next item, which is 7.2, publications and consultations.
Thank you, Chair. I think that's back to me. 2 publications to bring to your attention this time round. The first is that the Scottish Government are consulting on a draft infrastructure investment plan. I do have 1 or 2 concerns about it. I'm pleased to see the Scottish Government bringing this forward and building on the work of the Infrastructure Commission that reported last year. My concerns really are about their focus on the investment hierarchy, which very much talks about determining future needs by looking at project forecasts, particularly population forecasts, which in the past have been quite unfair, if I can use that word, in terms of the northeast. So the amount of development that has gone on in the northeast of Scotland hasn't always been recognised in forecasts, and therefore there's a tendency for us to lose out in investment priorities. And I would just like to highlight that really to the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland as they progress with this document. I have in Appendix 1 summarised some of the key commitments and key statements, and I think members would be interested to see a commitment over the next 5 years for over £500 million into active travel, for over £500 million into improved bus priority infrastructure, and around £3.8 billion in operating, maintaining and renewal of high-performing rail networks. So real still significant commitments in terms of future investment. And then under the strengthening connectivity section, just to say that Aberdeen to Central Belt, the A96, the Hadigan Junction, the Aberdeen City Region deal, the Lawrencekirk Junction are all specifically identified. So I wanted to bring that to the group's attention, that they seem to be recognising the projects that are in the pipeline in the northeast, but a little concern about the infrastructure investment hierarchy. The second document is to bring to your attention that Transport Scotland have produced a road safety framework to 2030 and contained within that a vision for zero fatalities by 2050. This is very much in line with the priority that we've contained in the draft regional transport strategy for the North East, and I think this is one that we should respond welcoming the idea and the thrust of it. So happy to take any questions on these proposed documents. Thank you.
Questions, folks? Any? Can we just note that report then as in the recommendations on page 106?
I did have my hand up, Chair. Sorry, I put it up when you were looking away. If I may, thanks, Rab. In the infrastructure plan, you made reference to projects covered by the City Region deal. Clearly, there's a lot of interest around the A90 to the north of Ellen, and the initial feasibility study and all of that work has been done as part of the City Region project, City Region deal. So, specifically, are those is the A90 north of Ellen likely to be included as a project?
My understanding is that the current list is those committed projects already in the pipeline. I think the scheme that you refer to, the A90 North, I think is one that we need to still make that case and have it included within the strategic transport projects review going forward. So it's not in the current list, but I think it's one that's very much on the radar.
Thanks. Just come back very quickly, Chair. Yes, in that case, we definitely need to push for that and keep reminding Transport Scotland and Scottish Government of that. We spent a considerable amount of City Region deal money already on that, and it needs to be taken forward. Otherwise, we're going to have to do all the work all over again, and that's the dualling up around Ellen, the roundabout, the junction, and so on. So all of that needs to be taken forward. So the more we shout about it, the better, hence me raising it. Thanks.
Agreed.
Thank you, that's helpful, Councillor Argyle. I'll include that in a response.
So can, on that note, can we agree to note 7.2? And if we move on to the complaints handling procedure, our next item at 7.3.
Okay, I'll be brief, Councillor MacDonald. A conversation around the office, or the virtual office, revealed that Nestrans didn't have a complaints handling procedure, and so it appeared that the other RTPs did, and indeed our partner local authorities did. And so, not wanting to miss out, we looked at the Scottish Ombudsman's website. They have a model complaints handling procedure, and so we have just adapted that for the use of Nestrans, and it's presented as an appendix. And that is what we're asking, just as one of the policy documents that Nestrans has, to help give us a framework, a degree of protection, I guess, in terms of these processes, and putting that forward for consideration for the board for approval today.
Thanks very much. Any questions to Paul over the procedure that we have in front of us? Nope. So can we approve the adoption and website publication of the Nestrans complaints handling policy as presented in Index 1?
Yes.
Great.
Thank you. If we move on to item 8, which is the information bulletin, if there's anything in particular you want to highlight, I'm recognizing people are peeling off because of time. Please do so, Rab.
Yeah, just a couple items for information. The City Council proposals on low emission zone due to be introduced in 2022. A framework that the council have produced on EVs, electric vehicles, and for information, the 2 campaigns that we'll be running, one relating to festive travel and one relating to road safety over the next couple of months. There's obviously been quite a lot of news coverage over a few months since our last meeting, primarily things that we've touched on today: Contour Station, consultation on the regional transport strategy. But if I could also mention that the other one is that we were successful in getting £250,000 for improvements to the Deeside Way in the area round about Crathis, Ballater, etc. So a significant development ongoing there at the moment by Aberdeenshire Council.
Thanks for that. Any questions or queries? Can we note? Thank you. And then move on to the conferences and presentations, which are there for us just to read, I think. If we could have a look at those, and then any questions? Nope. On to item 10, the last item on our agenda. Our future meetings. Any thoughts on this, Rab, for members?
Thanks, Chair. Always bring forward an indication what the likely reports are for the next meeting and the next few meetings. Members will recall at the last board we talked about the prospect for having presentations to some of our board meetings, and I've suggested there at the second bottom bullet point of some potential presentations that we could have. I think, having discussed today that we might not submit the regional transport strategy before Christmas, I think it would be a little unfair to expect the Cabinet Secretary to approve it at our February board meeting, which is when we might be finalising it. So I might rejig these a little, perhaps bringing forward someone from Belfast to talk to us about rapid transit if the board felt that was worthwhile. The ones that are missing, we've nothing there specifically on climate change and the climate challenge, and we've nothing specifically on active travel. So I may also think about potential speakers around those areas and think about how they might fit into a programme for the coming year. Happy to take any thoughts or views.
I would certainly welcome active travel champion Lee Craigie if the board felt that would be useful, or any others that open to the board really. Peter.
Yeah, I suppose we ought to be reasonably kind to the Minister and not expect such a quick turnaround on the RTS. Although I think it'd be very good for him to expect it, but never mind, that's another story. I think it'd be very good to get somebody across from, or to have the information on the rapid transit scheme in Belfast. We were obviously planning to go and have a look at it, about it, just as the pandemic hit, really, and we haven't heard any much more about it. So I think a presentation on that remotely would be a very good thing. I'd just very much welcome it.
Thanks for that. Anyone else want to have an input to potential presentations or any other matter? Well, I think that's it. We can, if we just, the recommendation is just to note the report. So if we can do that, colleagues, and thank everyone. We're a little over the 2 hours. I'm aware that it's a long time sitting in the same place. So thank you very much for your attendance, and look forward to, if not seeing you at the next board meeting, which is most likely going to be virtual, I suspect. And also we will have a lot to say at that one about the regional transport strategy, which, as Peter said earlier, is the main item on our wide agenda at the moment, going forward, and spending some time on that, I think, is really where we need to go. Sure. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.